Coming up next, Building a Better You with Minister Lelia Lewis, right here on To God Be the Glory radio broadcast.
Hi, I'm Lelia Lewis, and welcome to another edition of Building a Better You. Now, last week we spoke about how the Lord our God is faithful to us. So today we're going to talk about how faithful are you to Him. We already know He's faithful. His faithfulness never deteriorates. It never stops. So now we're going to put ourselves to the test of faith. And I call this lesson Faith on Trial. Now I learned that faith comes in levels. And levels are something that you have to learn and practice. And you can't just say, oh, I can do that and think that you can. Because like anything to succeed, it takes time, it takes practice, and it takes confidence. So what I've learned is that level of faith comes in three different levels. And I'm going to call the first level of beginners. You know, like if you go to a class or you take a course, you're new to the whole thing, so you're a beginner. But their first level was called little faith. And what that means is that's when you're focused on yourself, your circumstances, and sometimes you have it and sometimes you don't. I call it wishy-washy because I think it's like, well, everything's fine, now you got faith, but when things go not so good, the faith kind of dwindles. So the first category or the first level is the beginner's level, and that's called little faith. Now, the next level, I'm going to call that intermediate, and that comes under the heading of great faith. And that's when you're reaching out more. You know, you're learning. You want more wisdom. You want more understanding. You're beginning to mature, and now you're learning how to take the focus off of yourself, off of your circumstances, and put them more towards God. And that's developing that never give up attitude. And the last level is perfect faith. Now that's when you're completely at rest. That's when you know God's going to take care of your situation. That's not only knowing that He can do it, but now you can be able to see your actual situation done and completed. That's what we're aiming for, perfect faith. So now that we've identified and understand these levels, we're going to go over some different scenarios in the Bible and see what level of faith each one of these scenarios falls under. Now we're going to be reading out of the book of Matthew, and we're going to do chapter 8, chapter 9, and chapter 14 because I like the different scenarios, and we're going to see what levels of faith they were in when they had their troubles. Now let's start with chapter 8. I'm going to start in verse 5, and that's under the heading of the centurion's servant is healed. Now let's go with chapter 8, verse 5. And when Jesus entered into Capernaum, there came unto him a centurion, beseeching him, and saying, Lord, my servant lieth at home, sick of the palsy, grievously tormented. And Jesus said unto him, I will come and heal him. But the centurion answered and said, O Lord, I am not worthy that thou should come under my roof, but Just speak the words only, and I know my servant shall be healed. I know my servant shall be healed. Now already, in that one or couple of verses, the centurion sought out Jesus because he already had faith in Jesus. He already had faith. Let's go on to verse uh, 10. And when he said, just speak the words, and I know my servant will be healed. And Jesus heard that, and he marveled at that. And he said unto the people that were following, he said, verily I say unto you, I have not found so great faith, no, not in Israel. That's amazing. Now let's go to verse 13. And Jesus said unto the centurion, go thy way, and as thou hast believed, so be it done unto thee. And his servant was healed that very same hour. That very same hour. That's an example. That's an example of perfect faith. That centurion didn't even hesitate. He didn't even worry about the Lord having to be present. He didn't worry about the Lord having to lay hands on. He said, oh Lord, just speak the words, and I know my servant will be healed. That comes under the heading of perfect faith. Because he knew the situation, but he also saw it already completed before he got back home. Now let's go over to chapter 9, and this time we're going to read from verse 18. Now verse 18, that's under a ruler's daughter is raised. Verse 18. And we're going to read 18 and 19 and talk a little bit, and then we're going to continue on. Now 18 says, when Jesus was speaking, there came unto him a certain ruler, and worshipped him. And the ruler was saying to Jesus, my daughter is even now dead. But come and lay thy hand upon her, and she shall live. And Jesus arose and followed him, and so did his disciples. Now let's stop right there. This again is another example of the Father having perfect faith, because he again sought out Jesus, and all he said was, I know once you come and lay hands, she will rise again. That's perfect faith, because he already knew and he believed in what Jesus could do even before he sought him out. Now we're going to skip down to verse 23, because this is the response. And Jesus turned himself about and said, when Jesus came into the ruler's house, he saw the minstrels and the people making noise. And that meant that they were in mourning. They were in the house in mourning because the girl was dead. And Jesus said unto them, give place. That means stop, just stop where you are. For this maid is not dead, but she sleepeth. And what happened? They laughed him to scorn. They laughed him to scorn. So even though the Father had the faith, these people that were in mourning, they had little or no faith. They weren't even beginners, because some of them had no faith at all, because they were laughing. They didn't believe it. But let's look at verse 25. When the people were put forth, that means sent out, Jesus went in and took her by the hand, and the maid arose, and the fame hereof went abroad into all the land. So that meant even though all those were non-believers with no faith, now once they saw her arise, they were the ones that scorned Jesus, they were the ones that let everybody know. They were the ones that spread the word. Now just those few verses say, that shows how many people can be in the exact same environment and still see things differently solely because of their faith. The Father never doubted. He sought him out prior to even getting him there. And none of the people believed. So that's how fast people can be in the same situation and have a whole different outlook because of their faith. Now I'm going to back up a minute because I skipped over a few verses on purpose. I'm going to go back to verse 20. Let's see, I'm going to go back to verse 20, and this will be about the lady who wanted to touch the hem of Jesus' garment. So Jesus had left the man's house, and behold, a woman which was diseased with a bad blood of treatment. She had it for 12 years, and she came behind Jesus, and she touched the hem of his garment. And she said within herself, if I may but touch his garment, I shall be made whole. And Jesus turned around, and when he saw her, he said, daughter, be of good comfort. Thy faith has made thee whole. And the woman was made whole from that very hour. That again is another example of perfect faith. She sought him out. She already knew, she already believed, and all she needed was to touch the hem of his garment. What kind of faith do you have? Do you think you have a situation in your life where you could have that kind of faith to know ahead of time that God will fix it for you? Now, let's just go to a couple more verses here and in this chapter. And this is about the two blind men. The two blind men. And when Jesus had departed from there, two blind men followed him, crying and saying, Thou son of David, have mercy upon us. And when he had come into the house, the blind men came to him. And Jesus said unto you, Believe ye that I am able to do this? And they said, Yes, Lord. Then he touched their eyes, saying, According to your faith, be it unto you. And their eyes were opened right then and there. And this again was another example of perfect faith. They sought him out. Anytime you seek Jesus out, knowing ahead of time what he can do for you, that's how it comes to pass. Now think about yourself. Is there a circumstance in your life that you need to be praying about, that you truly believe that God can take care of? Now those are 3 or 4 examples. Now I'm going to go to chapter 14. I have one more. This is the main one. And this is the one that a lot of us already are familiar with. And this is when Jesus walked on the sea. And we're going to start. Now this took place after Jesus had fed the flock of 5,000 plus, because that was 5,000 men plus women and children. So this takes place after the feeding, because he had told his disciples to go into the ship and go over to the other side. while he would send the people away. So we're going to go to verse 23, and we're going to pick up there. And we're going to determine what type of faith this fell under. Verse 23. And when he, Jesus, had sent the multitudes away, he went up into the mountains to pray. And when the evening had come, he was there alone. But the ship was now in the midst of the sea. It was tossed with waves, for the wind was very contrary. And in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went unto them walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, It's a spirit. And they cried out for fear. They cried out for fear. And the disciples were really troubled. And Jesus said, Why? Why are you afraid? Now, this is an example of little faith, because even though they were believers, they're disciples. So you know they're believers, and even just because of the storm, they went from good faith to almost no faith because they got scared. They got scared. Now let's go to verse 27. But Jesus said straight away to them, he said, Be of good cheer. It is I. Be not afraid. And Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it be thou, bid me to come unto thee on the water. And so he said, Come. Jesus said, Come. And when Peter came down out of the ship, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. Now that was Peter having great faith. That was really great faith, because he knew that he could walk on water. But look what happened. Now, verse 30 says, But when he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid and beginning to sink. And he cried, saying, Lord, save me, save me. And immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him and said, O thou of little faith, wherefore did thou doubt? And that just goes to show you how quickly our faith can change. And just as quickly as Peter had great faith when he started walking out on the water, he lost it. He lost it because he lost sight of his focus. When he walked out on that water, he had great faith because where was his focus? His focus was on God. And that's what great faith is. Having your focus on God, not on your circumstance. But once he lost sight of that, once the waves blew up and he got scared and everything, he lost sight of God and focused on the waves and the wind. And that made him go back to little or no faith, because now he was focused on his circumstance and on himself, instead of staying focused on God. And that's what it took. So now he was reduced back to little or no faith because he took his focus off of Jesus. And Jesus was disappointed when he said, Oh, thou of little faith, why did you doubt? Because I guess Jesus was trying to figure out, why would you doubt me when you know what I'm capable of? Let's go to verse 32. And when they had come into the ship, the wind ceased. The wind ceased. Now that they saw that, they were more comfortable. And then they were in the ship, and they came and worshipped him, saying, Of a truth, thou art the Son of God. And once they saw that, Yeah, now their perfect faith was restored. But I just wanted you to look at how many times in that one incident the faith changed. It went from perfect to none to little to some to great back to perfect. But that's what I mean. The whole point is to try to relate, to stay focused on Jesus, focused on God, focused on not your circumstance, not your stuff, all because they lost their focus on what really mattered. Now let's read the last couple verses, 34 through 36. And when they had gone over, they came into the land of Gennesaret. And when the men of that place had knowledge of him, they sent out into all the country round about, and brought unto him all that were diseased, and besought him, they sought him out, that they might only touch the hem of his garment. And as many as touched were made perfectly whole. Perfectly whole. So once they found out about him, they believed, and they too, all they needed was to touch the hem of his garment. And it said, anyone, all that touched the hem of his garment, they were all made perfectly whole. It's all about faith, it's all about trust, and it's all about belief. Our faith is on trial every single day. And that's why we have to read. We have to read, we have to meditate on the word daily. Because most of us are in the category of what I call great faith. We're kind of in the middle. We're reaching for more. That's why we read more. That's why we study more. We have great faith, but we need more wisdom and more understanding. We're still maturing to get to that perfect faith status. And that's what we have to work on. And that brings me to the poem I want to share with you today. And I wrote this back in 2021. And I based it on the story of David and Goliath because David was a young boy. Yet he was the only one that had enough courage and faith to take on a giant Goliath. And that's what made me write this poem. It says, God is with you. David was a young boy with a slingshot and a stone. He fought a mighty battle, but he didn't do it alone. Come forth, he told Goliath, for I know my God is with me. Let's see who's left standing, who will have this victory. We all have our battles, as he did long ago. But know that God is with you everywhere you go. He said he'll never leave you or forsake you in this life. Through trials and tribulations, unhappiness or strife. We know him as our Savior, Deliverer, and Friend. He holds our hand throughout each day, from beginning to the end. From beginning to the end. We don't have to worry about his faithfulness to us. We have to worry about our faithfulness to him. Now, like I said, most of us, I think, fall in that middle stage. We're in that great faith area, but that's where we kind of stay. Because the minute something happens, we tend to what? Lose our focus. I mean, you can't just keep the focus when everything's fine. You can't just keep the focus when everything's going your way. You've got to learn, and that's why we have to read and reread and study and meditate on the words. Because these words have to penetrate. It has to get in our mind and become a way of living. We have to reach for more. And that's what we spoke about last week about Satan trying to get into our head. Because Satan knows if he can get into your head, once he gets into your mind, he's changing your thought pattern. So we have to stay true to what we know. And what we know is that we have to learn to be restful. And I also learned that little faith meant you were in a restless position. I called it wishy-washy. But perfect faith meant you were restful. So that meant you were completely at ease because you know that God's going to take care of your situation. You go in your prayer with confidence. And when things are going fine, that's when you praise Him and thank Him. And in your prayer, if you're asking for something, envision it already being done. Imagine how it will be when this situation is completed. Know that you can put your trust in God. That's the whole point of perfect faith. Perfect faith. He did it. We know He can do it. And we can see the situation coming to fruition. So I want to ask you, I have a couple of questions I wanted to ask. I wanted to ask you, where is your faith level? Now think about it. Think about something that's on your mind, something that you've been kind of tossing around, worrying about maybe, even stressing over, because that means you're not in, are you even in great faith? Because you're still kind of wishy-washy. So what is it that's holding you captive? I mean, most of us are in the middle, but are you restful or are you restless? And like I said, most of us are kind of in the middle. We're wishy-washy, but we're trying to get better. So we've got to keep maturing. We've got to keep reading. And that's the only thing that's going to bring us to where we need to be. And just like David, he was a young boy and he had more courage than all the men that were at the battle. Not Saul, not none of his soldiers, none of them wanted to fight Goliath, and they had all the equipment necessary. But they didn't have Jesus on their mind. They had everything they thought was necessary. Because what were they focusing on? They were focusing on how big the giant was. Oh my gosh, look how big that he is, and all the land, and all how many warriors they had. They were focused on all the wrong things. Not one of them was focused on God. None of them was focused on the support of our Lord. And until you learn to get your focus where it belongs, on what matters, that's the only thing that will bring us through. Nobody, no equipment, only God. And my closing words for today are, there is no situation or any circumstance too difficult for God. And until next week, I'm Lelia Lewis. Thanks for joining me.
You've been listening to Minister Lilia Lewis right here on To God Be the Glory radio broadcast. What an awesome word. Denise Marshall.
I want to shout out to my daughter, Pastor Denise Marshall, North Carolina. Thanks for joining me.